So now we are joined by the Member of Parliament for Kikuyu constituency. He is the leader of the majority coalition in the National Assembly, the Honorable KIMANI ICHUNG'WAH. Good morning, Mheshimiwa.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Asante.
Good to have you here today. Karibu sana. It's been a while since you were last here.
Oh yeah.
It was before the budget.
Before the budget, before the national dialogue.
Before national dialogue. There's a lot that's happened since then.
A lot.
We'll talk about it soon. City has the day's proverb. This week the proverbs are from Eritrea.
Yes. If you hear a mad man talking, wait a minute. And you will hear what makes people think he is mad.
If you hear a madman talking, just wait a minute, and you will hear what makes people think he's mad. Mheshimiwa, what's your interpretation of this?
If you hear a madman speak, you will realize what makes people think
He's mad.
he's mad. Incoherence. Yeah.
What are the Eritreans saying?
Talking about incoherence. Yeah. No normal man speaks things that are coherent, things that make sense to anybody else other than himself.
City? Deep with one word.
It's very good.
It's deep with one word.
No, it's very, very good. Incoherent.
You know, City usually gives marks to people. So how do you score the Mheshimiwa this morning?
You know, today's a fairly warm morning.
It's a Thursday.
But it is warm, isn't it? Maybe
It could still be in that meeting.
maybe I'm not feeling warm, but it isn't warm. It's warm, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, so it's a warm morning. This one is going to be out of 15. We move from 10 and out of 10, 15. Which one has gotten 15 out of 15?
Wow.
With that one word, incoherent.
Bas.
Do I say I went to Alliance?
Well, do we
You
say...
could say that.
Do we also say that Alliance is in Kikuyu?
Oh yes, you have to. You
School in your backyard.
Yes.
right
Yeah, let's go to...
about 5 minutes from my home.
But,
When other people used to spend weeks coming to school,
Yeah.
you'd spend minutes going home.
well,
I have been fortunate.
you know, you could say, Mheshimiwa alisoma mtaani. Yes,
Kijijini.
kijijini, hapo tu.
Hapo tu.
Yeah.
Chapo zilikuwa napatikana at least.
Yeah. Mheshimiwa, the day before yesterday in the National Assembly, we witnessed some drama.
Yeah.
Members of the National Assembly were up in arms and they were saying, look, no CDF, no parliament. Parliament had to be adjourned because of lack of quorum, because members of parliament are unhappy due to the delayed disbursement of NG's CDF funds. You even spoke in parliament and said, you know what, if even they sent bursary money to schools, and would have no issue. But now there's no bursary coming to us so that we can send to people. And then the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary says, we have no money for NGCDF. He told the House Committee yesterday, before the Finance and National Planning Committee, he said the Ruto administration has been stretched thin and is blaming the lack of NGCDF funds on reallocations to mitigate drought and flood calamities. He's basically saying we're in a cash crunch.
Yeah.
What's happening, Mheshimiwa?
Well, members of parliament being apprehensive about the disbursement of NGCDF, myself included, is no new thing to begin with, because we are the people's representatives. And when you represent people, you have a feel of where they are. So we know times are difficult for everybody, and schools will be opening. I know everybody is thinking about Christmas. We are thinking ahead about January, when kids will be going back to school. And we have to start preparing how you get people to apply and get bursaries disbursed for them. So that was the apprehension with members of parliament the day before yesterday. We tried to tell them the commitments that had been given by the National Treasury. Of course, out of playing to the gallery, nobody was listening to what was being said. The same thing was repeated yesterday. And you saw they were all come. And because money will be released. Is a cash crunch that has a lot to do with cash flow. And when you're managing your cash flows, just like any business or any small enterprise or individual for that matter, you have got to prioritize. So the government is just in a position where they are looking at their cash position and asking themselves, do we start disbursing money for bursaries today while schools are opening in January, or do we deal with the flood mitigation measures? With people who are marooned in the northern parts of Kenya, people who have no food, people who can't access medicine because trucks could not access their dispensaries and all that. Restoring communication, be it roads, be it electricity, be it even fiber optic. I had a situation where somebody was telling me even fiber cables have been washed away in the north and they are completely cut off out of communication. So it's just that balancing act that the National Treasury has to do. And budgeting is about prioritizing and knowing what comes first, when.
But then, Mheshimiwa, it's 6 months. 6 months into the financial year and 6 months of delayed disbursements. We are also dealing with delayed disbursement of capitation. Schools closed, they had not received the money that they ought to have received by the time they were closing. So we're heading into January with that burden for the last 2 terms going into the next term. Plus new admissions going in, no money for bursaries. It doesn't seem like the issue is because of the current floods.
No, the issue is not
longer.
about the current floods. And I think even during the national dialogue process, this matter is one of the issues that we dealt with in depth around the agenda of cost of living. And if you listen to Professor Ndungu, the cabinet secretary, he's telling you that the country is running very, very fast to remain at the same position. You can imagine you're running very fast, but
you're not moving.
You're not moving. You're at the same position. Why? Because of where you found yourself in from the word go. And principally, if you listen to him, he will tell you, and I am also of that view, there have been missteps on macroeconomic policies and the economic management of the country in the past, and we found ourselves in a very deep hole. That deep hole, people have always politicized it when you said that we were in a problem. You remember when the deputy president said in Kasarani during the inauguration day that we have found empty coffers, this country is in deep trouble. People took it as a political statement. I think it's only now that people are beginning to appreciate then that things were really that thick. I had problems. People have problems with Professor Dr. Devin D. When he said in one of his tweets,
Sunday tweets.
Yes, I don't know if they're on Sundays. I know others who tweet after midnight.
Well,
but he said, "How I wish we lost this election." And people never got what Professor Ndi was saying. Some level of sarcasm, him asking, if only Kenyans knew what it has taken this government to remain afloat, not to sink. Countries around us are sinking. Ethiopia the other day announced they are unable to pay their debts. Ghana did that, I think, late last year. We are telling you by the end of this December, we have to settle the first $300 million of our 2014 Euro bond. And we are telling you that we shall not default on our loans. Those positive signals in the economy are making a difference on even the support we are getting from the multilateral donors. You heard the other day World Bank commit to give the country $12 billion over a period of 3 years. That's about 1.8 trillion shillings over 3 years. IMF committed to, I think, $938 million. That's another 100 and something billion. And that tells you that the country is signaling that you are on the right trajectory in terms of macroeconomic management. And fixing an economy, Latiff, I'll tell you, is not a walk in the park. Therefore, the situation that we are in did not begin with floods, did not even begin with the drought. It's a situation that has been built up over time. Some of us saw this coming. I'm a student of economics. I am a former chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
I was fired after 18 months, although many Kenyans, I don't know if in jest or in an attempt to tell you are part of the problem. imagine that our chairman budget for 9, some say 7, some say 9, some say 8 years. Our chairman budget at appropriations committee for 19 months before I was fired.
At least for one budget cycle.
At least for a budget cycle and a half. And I have challenged any Kenyan who thinks otherwise to access the budget and appropriations committee reports. I authored at least 4 or 5 reports to the National Assembly, public documents. All the issues happening today are issues that I put under pen and paper and submitted to Parliament, and reports were adopted. When it became too tough, I was fired because there are certain things I said I shall not do. And that was a point of fallout between me and the former president. And therefore, we are not in a situation where we just landed from nowhere. It is a situation we have created over time. Even the debt hole you talk about, you are saying today that you're spending 1.1 trillion shillings out of your revenues on debt repayment. That debt wasn't incurred last year or in the last 12 months. It's a debt that you have accumulated over the last 10 years. Remember, I don't know if it's the Standard of the Nation I saw the other day, one of the papers, enumerate where President Mwai Kibaki left this country, where he found this country in terms of debt level to where he left, where President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2013, where we found this country because I was in that administration, where we left in 2022, where President William Ruto has found this country, and where we are. And if you look at those figures, if you have an analytical mind, you can tell clearly where the problem is.
Also,
the problem
debt
is largely
we'll come
in the
back
last
into
10
that.
years.
I just want to clear this one out because we're talking about now a liquidity issue. Like you said, it's a cash flow management challenge that we are having. And it's not new. It's been there for a while. That tells you that the government is not collecting as much as it was hoping to collect by the time we are getting to the end of a year or a month. So it's also telling you the state of our economy in terms of people being able to remit their taxes to government. But we are not hearing anything that is going to address that.
Nobody is listening. Latiff, it has been said. I was in the European Parliament with the president the other week. And before that, we had a meeting with the president of the IMF. And in that meeting, the president of the IMF was talking to the European nations and telling them whether you like it or not, all the European economies, you must begin improving your tax collections. And while we were at the European Parliament, I started reading some documents that I found on a table from that meeting. And you look at an economy like France, where we were, their tax to GDP ratio is in the region of 43%. Ours is between 14 and 16%. The East African community states are looking at increasing their tax to the GDP ratio to about 25% by the year 2030. We are yet to get there. What does that tell you? It tells you tax as a percentage of your GDP, you are collecting less than you should be collecting. Not because Kenyans are not paying taxes, but one, because there could be a disparity between the level of economic growth and how much taxes you're able to collect. Because you may not have captured everybody who is supposed to be paying tax. And I'll tell you, there is work ongoing with the National Treasury and those who cared to listen when Professor Ndung'u appeared before the National Dialogue Committee said that they are in the process of having whole review of the tax regime, the entire tax regime, targeting all our tax instruments with 3 key objectives. 1, to increase our national revenues, how much money you raise nationally. 2, to broaden the tax base, to make sure that everybody is paying tax. 3, to lessen the tax burden to Kenyans, because that's where the disparity is, that probably a few people pay taxes, and there are many others who are earning an income that don't pay taxes. Coming back to this year, remember the finance bill of 2023, the most debated finance bill in the history of our country, the most litigated against act of parliament. Up to now, we are in court on it. That had an impact on our revenues, revenue collection this year. Remember the first 2 months, that bill was put in abeyance by the courts, and therefore you will even see that reflected in the figures that were collected. The first quarter, KRA did report that they had a shortfall of close to, I think, 79 billion shillings in the first quarter, the first 3 months of the financial year. Consequently, if you look at the figures collected in October and November, there is some improvement, but it tells you that you have no time to sit back and wait for things to happen. Something will have to give in if you make a mistake or a misstep on your tax collections, on your macroeconomic policies. And that's why Professor Njuguna Ndungu tells you we are running so fast, if not anything else, to remain at the same place, to remain afloat, to make sure you don't sink, and to make sure that in due course, and I have been telling people, you found yourself in a very deep hole where there was no light at the end of the tunnel. Now at least you've gotten to a position where you can see where you are going.
You know, sometimes
you are getting to the ground level.
The hamster is told, just stop running, because you're not getting out of this thing. You're in a wheel, it's just, you're in a hamster wheel.
You're perpetuating that movement.
Perpetuating the movement. Maybe it's the same that you ought to tell the National Treasury.
Look,
when the National Treasury comes to you and tells you that we collected 1.8 trillion shillings in the last financial year, but we hope to collect 2.9 trillion shillings in the next financial year, you sit back and ask, boss, are you sure? They tell you they're sure. 6 months down the road, you are having a liquidity problem, a cash crunch, where money for development that goes into CDF is not being released. Money for other areas is not going. Clearly, there's a problem.
Let me tell you, Latiff.
Maybe pause and change direction.
You could pause and do nothing, and you think that will be responsible of any government anywhere in the world. So if you find yourselves in a position where you have a problem, look for solutions. I'll give you the case example of the last supplementary one budget that we just did about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Out of the additional total expenditure that was being catered for was 145 billion shillings on account of what? Foreign exchange fluctuations on debt repayment.
Yeah.
So do you then go and tax Kenyans more to be able to pay this 145 billion? Other questions you need to ask yourself. Or do you go in and cut part of your expenditure? We did that. We opted for the latter. Go in, cut part of your expenditure to be able to accommodate this unmitigated disaster of 145 billion shillings that you have to cater for. Things like those Professor Ndungu is talking about, you find yourselves in a place where you are dealing with farmers who are taxpayers and who you collect taxes from, and businesses that come from the value chain of farming that pay taxes. If you don't do anything about those farmers, then the cash crunch will get worse. So put in some money, mop up milk so that farmers don't lose their milk. Put in some money, make sure coffee farmers have their coffee being bought and assured of a good price. Put money so that we don't lose our maize harvest because of the El Nino rains. You can't dry all your maize. Make sure there are dryers and milk coolers in place and in time so that we don't lose our harvest, so that the cost of living does not continue going up. Because if you lose that maize, by February next year, you have to start importing more maize. Foreign exchange situation will get worse. Therefore, it's a situation where if you find yourselves in a place where revenues are either static or dwindling, then you cut your expenditure.
You talk about cutting expenditure. Where have we seen this cut of expenditure in the last, in the recent past? Where have we seen cutting expenditure?
Largely, the biggest cut was in travel.
Okay. Travel by
things like O&M, which in all government ministries. And travel lost about 50% of what government was to spend this year across the board from all the three arms of government. I know Parliament had an issue, parliamentarians had an issue with some cuts, and they reinstated some to the level of about 35 or 40%, largely because a lot of parliamentary work requires people to, part of their travel is part of the day-to-day work of parliamentarians, because some are compensated for mileage and all that. And if you cut off, including what you have to compensate people for mileage for using their own motor vehicles, I'm not a beneficiary for the last 10 years, so I don't know.
So, do we have a global figure in terms of how much of this expenditure was cut? And I ask that because it would be great to see, if we have a global figure, then where then can we see the application of this figure that has made some kind of dent then in the responsibility or the burden of this money? Do we have, if we say expenditure was cut across all arms, what did that amount to? And where do we see that being applied to see that there was some kind of relief?
Well, let me not give you an absolute figure because I don't have the figure in my head, but it's a figure I could get if I had time to go through my phone records here. But ask yourself, for instance, I've given you a figure of 145 billion shillings that's in my head on expenditure
on forex
that wasn't budgeted for, but you have to pay on debt servicing.
Debt repayment,
So if you're asking if there was an expenditure cut of, say, 200 billion,
yes,
145 billion goes to service that 145 billion. I've given you instances where we have about a figure of 400 million shillings going towards milk mop-up, another 2.8 billion shillings going towards procurement of maize dryers and milk coolers, mitigation measures on floods in this drought season, 1 billion shillings going towards emergency relief for provision of food items and medicine for those people who are marooned in floods. Therefore, it is a figure probably in the region of 300 plus billion shillings, but which you can account for to the cent in terms of where that money has gone.
Yeah. And we can see the repetition of the same as we go into a cycle whereby we go into the next 3 months, for example, and across the different arms, and an expected amount which was pre-budgeted now is cut, and then we can see that money then going into something else. Over time, we should be able to see that, right? I'll give an example. When we talk about the dehydration of milk and, the freezers and all of this, we should then be able to see in the mid to long term, the money that was saved as a result of that, and then actually, because we keep saying $100 billion, 100 billion shillings should be felt in the economy. If you put 100 billion into the economy today, we should be able to see the results. It's not because KIMANI ICHUNG'WAH said, we should be able to see it, isn't it?
Precisely. And I'll give you the case example that you have mentioned about milk and maize farmers. If you don't put in 400 million shillings to mop up milk, what will happen?
We'll throw it in the
rains
bush.
are good. There is overproduction of milk. Milk prices will drop to the region they were in 3 years ago of 15, 17 shillings a litre. That will be felt by the farmer who is producing that milk. The maize farmer who has bought fertilizer, who has put in labor, who has tilled his farm, produced maize at an average cost maybe of 3,000 shillings. If that maize goes to rot because he could not dry that maize, you will feel it. That maize farmer will feel it. You and I who are not farming maize will feel it because you will not have maize to grind for maize flour. Maize flour prices, Kenyans today have forgotten that a year ago maize flour was at 240 shillings. The least you could get a packet, the cheapest packet of maize flour was at 210 shillings. Today the cheapest is at 135 shillings. That did not just happen without strategic and deliberate measures being taken by government. When we came into government last year and we sat, I remember before the president was sworn in, the day after the Bomas debacle and he was announced as a winner, we had a 3-day meeting with officers in the National Treasury, including the former cabinet secretary. In fact, the last 2 days, we threw out the former cabinet secretary from the National Treasury from those meetings. Because we realized officers in the National Treasury were withholding information when the minister was seated there. Because of the state capture that persisted then. You remember issues like the telecom haste of 6 billion shillings in the last 2 days before the elections would never have come out had we not had those meetings. Therefore, we had a deeper and greater appreciation of the state of the economy. We knew things were not good because I told you, when I was chairman budget, there are certain things I said to the former regime that did not sit well with those who were in power.
As a result of you knowing that things were bad? And
yes.
So you would speak out of... So, I'm sorry, I have to interject.
I would not speak out in public.
In that position, because this is the thing that we keep talking about what was found without looking at the responsibility of what was going on at the time. So
Precisely.
I'm interested to know that in the specific position in which you were in at that time, if things were going down the drain, was there a clear position that was taken in, folks? This cannot continue to happen in the way in which it's happening, but it would appear as though, and optics are important here, it would appear as though everybody crossed their hands and just looked at a situation, but then now everybody preserves or reserves the right to say, yeah, well, you know, things were bad at that time, they were even worse, and this is the mess we are with today.
I'll tell you again, and I'll refer you to facts that exist. Go to the parliamentary Hansard of June or early July, the year I was fired as chairman budget. Listen to what I said in parliament. And I got in a lot of trouble because of saying I will no longer be an apologist for a government that is not going to deliver because people can't listen. I said in parliament when I was still chairman of the budget and appropriations committee, that was probably like a month or two before I was fired. So we didn't just sit back. We said these things were going to happen. They happened. When we won the elections, we had an appreciation that things were not good. And we sought to get a better understanding of the exact situation. And I'm telling you, we found in a situation where then the deputy president, being the truthful man he says he is, he had to announce it to the country. We opted to focus on what needs to be done. And whenever we talk about things as they were, we only say this to remind Kenyans that this situation did not arrive yesterday or in the last 12 to 15 months. It's a situation that we have
slowly
grinded into. And the best thing that we can do as a country is recollect ourselves, look for solutions together, work towards those solutions. Of course, being politicians, there are those who will think that whenever you talk about where you found yourselves at, you are finger pointing, you want to blame others. But remember, even without blaming others, you find yourself in a hole. You're in a hole. And
so you're not blaming others.
You're not blaming others. You just found yourself in a hole.
You're just setting the
solution. So get out of the hole.
The Honorable KIMANI ICHUNG'WAH is the Member of Parliament for Kikuyu constituency, leader of the majority in the National Assembly, and co-chair of the, what is it called? National Dialogue, what?
Former co-chair.
It's over.
It's over.
Aye.
Immediate former chairman.
Immediate former chairman, yes.
Okay. Of
National Dialogue Committee.
That one.
Let's look at things on let's go to a higher level, right? A previous part of a conversation here, we were talking about what can actually be done. Because, look, we cannot run away from the situation here. Economic burden heavy on the shoulders of many a Kenyan today. And one of the things that we did see was a bill now that is then being brought again to yourselves to look at the position of chief administrative secretaries. If this bill goes through, 50 of these individuals will be brought back. And, okay, one can assume they never really went anywhere, but essentially will be entrenched in law, and that these individuals then will now run as assistant ministers, which does a skyrocket to the wage bill. We're already complaining that there's no money, right? But here we are wanting to bring in higher expenditure because we know one individual, what it's going to take to run that office, right? But there are 50 of them now, essentially, if this passes. It flies in the face of logic to then say that here is a country that's already grappling, even with your own admission, but then we're going to come and try and entrench something in law that will take the wage bill and shoot it through the roof. I'm curious as to what your opinion about this is.
You will appreciate the situation that I am in. And remember, when I sat here, looked at all these newspapers without reference to any particular media house, and I said, newspapers.
Tubundu tuangadeti.
Actually, a diminutive for a person.
There is somebody who called you that. I'm not calling you that. But first, I sit in a position where I am unable to fully comment on matters that are before Parliament for obvious reasons, and especially being in leadership in Parliament. I am restrained from commenting on legislative proposals before they come for debate. But I'll tell you, those are legislative proposals that come from the executive. Our work as Parliament is to be able to look into those legislative proposals, see if they make sense for the country. If members of Parliament are convinced they make sense, then they pass the legislative proposals. If, as they are, if they see there's something that does not make sense, they have the liberty and every right to amend. And I'll tell you, as leader of majority, we have given latitude to our members of Parliament.
Let's ask the question differently.
To be
then.
able to look at all legislative proposals.
Allow me to change that then, because understanding and taking into consideration the legislative boundaries, of course, that are created by this. The country is in a position whereby liquidity is an issue today. Would it make sense then to Parliament to bring in something that would see expenditure rise, that would take or have a greater effect on how much Kenyans then would have to give in terms of a burden? I'm glad you see me. I'd like you to answer that in terms of would you?
I see you because you are trying to trick the question to make me say what I should not be saying.
Would it make sense to Kimani Ichung'WAH to increase expenditure on something where the country already is having a difficult time?
Depends. It depends. There are situations where you may find yourself that if you incur an extra expenditure in one area, it will give you value that would help you probably manage your resources more efficiently and make sense to the economy. And I'm not saying this is the case for that particular case because I'm avoiding to discuss the merits and demerits of a legislative proposal.
Can I chime in? Because I don't have to avoid
to be published.
Yes, I don't have your constraints.
Yeah.
So if I may. How many are there? 51?
I don't even know. 50. 50, I think.
50?
The ones who were appointed initially.
Even if there were 100, how much would we be paying them really? And if we look at even just the debt that we are now incurring because of the bleep in our foreign exchange with the dollar, in my opinion, it wouldn't matter. What matters here are the optics. The optics that are represented by an expenditure, because it's not just someone being given a job, it's a job and everything that goes with it. The optics. The argument that you put across that perhaps it is a good thing sometimes to spend, yes, actually it is a very, very viable argument. And anyone who's in business will know that in order to make money, sometimes you spend money. It's a very simple thing. However, if I look at the situation that we find ourselves in, is there any justifiable way in which we will say that employing these 51 Kenyans, apart from the political benefit it may bring about, that the appointment will help us get out of the quagmire that we're in? Because the discussion and everything we're discussing here is we seem to be hurtling down a cliff, and there's a likelihood that if and when and should and perhaps if we default, we will go the way of Lebanon, the way of Ghana. How does the government manage the optics of what it does? Because in my opinion, the employment of these 51 people will not really change anything fundamental apart from the optics, which are horrible.
I think you're on point, Siti. It's all about optics and whether or not it makes economic sense. And the optics, a legislative proposal does not mean that then if you, assuming it passed, and I don't know if it will or not, assuming it did.
Let me tell you, it will pass.
I don't know.
I know.
I don't know.
But let's continue. It will definitely
because
pass.
Even myself, I will have to interrogate what government is saying, because that's what I'm required to do by the Constitution. Interrogate what the executive is saying, the value that the country will derive from, whether not even 50 or 100, even two, even one person.
Right.
Yeah. For instance, I can tell you in the last 6 months or so, there was an embargo on new recruitment, and even in the budgeting process, it was made clear that you will not recruit any more staff in government for new staff, other than replacing probably those who have left service.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's a lot to do with optics, as you say. And how well government manages that optics depends also on the timing of when you get into recruiting people, the state of the economy at that point. Therefore, that's what I'm saying, it's not something that we can pass judgment on here based on a newspaper headline or based on a legislative proposal.
It has got to be
that has not even been published.
I want to bring in another question of optics, and this is optics on. In the last parliament, the 12th parliament, the optics were parliament has been captured by the executive. Parliament is being controlled by the executive. I'm afraid, Kimani, the optics for the 13th parliament seem to be heading in the same direction. Especially when you say that parliament can actually cede its oversight power on the matter of privatization of state corporations and say that you can decide, you can go ahead and conclude the process, and we as parliament, we don't want to play a role in it. Again, Magazeti.
Latiff, Magazeti. And not Magazeti. I think it's just our nature as Kenyans at times. We run with what goes fast. The privatization bill that was initially published had that particular proposal that you talk about.
Yes.
But look at the final product. The final product is not as you put it. The final product, Parliament made sure that our oversight role over government remains intact. Therefore, people still continue to debate something that was, but never look at what is. For instance, let me use this legislative proposal in the Magazeti this morning. That is what government has brought to Parliament. The end result will be something different.
Will be different.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.